There is also a second issue when it comes to using the built-in follow-up intents. Let's say that the user provides some kind of incorrect input and we want to design fallbacks to handle those and re-prompt the user to provide the right input. So let's take a look at the intent, which is the child of the first of the parent, where after the user says that they want to buy a submarine, we will ask them for their first name, and this is the intent which actually captures their first name. You can see that it uses an input context called user wants to buy submarine hyphen follow-up, and you can see that it takes in like a first name as the training phrase, and if it's successfully captured the first name, it's going to ask what is your last name. Now if the user were to make a mistake when they typed in the first name, or if Dialogflow is not able to identify the first name from their input, it has to reprompt them, or it has to handle it in some way. There has to be a fallback. So the way you usually do that is we will go to this create fallback intent over here, and I'm going to call this first name fallback, and I'm going to use the context which was set. So let's use this input context, and for now I'm going to delete this output context, and my response will be I didn't get the first name, please capitalize the first letter of your first name and check if there are any typos. So that is the response coming back from the agent in case it's not able to identify what the first name the user was inputting. So we can see that this is going to be the fallback for the intent which captures the first name. If we were to do the same thing for the intent which captures the last name, so let's call this the last name fallback, and here the context will be, alright, so it's going to be this one, and this is going to be the input context in this case. Let's delete the output context again, and here the response will be sorry, I didn't get the last name, please capitalize the first letter of your last name and check if there are any typos. So I do the same kind of response except that I indicate that here we have missed the last name. The user has not provided the last name correctly. So once we have defined these intents, you can see that it's going to show up in your intents list as so these are context based fallback intents, because you can see they are displayed slightly differently from the other intents. You can first of all see that the icon it uses for this is this bookmark kind of icon, which is indicating that it's a fallback intent. And you can also see that right up front it's going to show you the name of the context which is used for that fallback. So this is a way to distinguish between, for example, these two fallbacks, because you know that this fallback uses a different input context from the other one. And this is the way that you can generally handle a context based fallback, where you expect the user to, let's say in this case it provides an input, and if that is failing, then you can handle it by using the same input context, except that you will use it to create a new intent, and that will be a fallback intent. That will be a like a fallback type intent. So if I were to actually go through the flow now, let's say I want to buy a submarine. It's asking for the first name, so I'll get Adam. Okay, now it's expecting me to provide my last name. Instead of providing a genuine or expected last name, let's say that I just type something unexpected. So I say some gibberish. So you can see what happened here. Instead of saying that the response that you might have expected at this point is I didn't get your last name, but you can see instead it's coming back with the response I didn't get your first name and asks us to check the first letter and so on. And the reason this is happening is also related to the way the follow-up intent tree is constructed. If you remember, as soon as the user triggers this intent, user wants to buy submarine, it's going to set an output context with a lifespan of 2. And after in the conversation over here, after the user provides their first name, the output context of the first intent, which is the let's actually take a look at what it's called, this context over here. Now because this is still active, when the user types something which was not expected, like some gibberish which I've typed over here, it is going to trigger the fallback for the context over here. So if you go back and look at this intent list again, we want this last name fallback to get triggered, and what actually happened was that the first name fallback is the intent which got triggered, and obviously that's a mistake and that's an error. And the reason this is happening is because Dialogflow sets the output context to 2, the lifespan of the output context to 2 by default when it's creating this follow-up intent tree. So you can see that this is just one more kind of issue that you face when you're using the follow-up intent tree in Dialogflow. It actually makes it quite a bit harder to design good fallback intents that you are able to control. That is, you lose fine-grained control over your fallback intents. And if you hadn't used the follow-up intent tree and you had just used the intents like with the flat intents without like any tree structure, in that case you'll actually have a lot more control over the way the fallbacks are triggered, simply because the context lifespan is set to 1 for each intent, and you know exactly which context is going to be active at each step in the conversation. So I hope that you see that there are actually a few issues with using the built-in follow-up intents which Dialogflow provides if you want to create more predictable chatbots. And you can still use these follow-up intents for the more simpler use cases and if it's more of a toy chatbot. But once you start moving towards chatbots where you actually need a lot of fine-grained control, you will start appreciating the use of creating your own intents and making sure that you exert greater control over the lifespan that you set, and you can do that only by not using the follow-up intents in that case.